we were evolved to survive, and some people might think, well, it's not really in your interest to be generous to other people, just focus on yourself and your family. But no, we have evolved instincts to be kind to others, and that is actually how, as a whole, we've survived and thrived. So yes, it's wired deep within us, and what people discover when they are kind is that they get a unique kind of fulfillment from it, a sense of meaning, a sense of happiness, even, and that helps fuel this unexpected process. And it's not just that we're wired to be generous; we're actually wired to respond to generosity.
All right, Chris, let's dig in here. So, what's the big idea behind your new book, Infectious Generosity?
Well, the idea is that we can change the way we think about our connected world. Right now, in the world that we're in, most people are dismayed, worried, anxious, and sick at the level of divisiveness that's out there. It seems like, whether intentionally or otherwise, I think otherwise, we have created systems that dial up the nastiness in each other, the tribalism. And a lot of the voices on social media, for example, that have most reach are voices that really point to the ugliness of the other side, and level accusations. And, we've got this world that is clearly getting more and more divided. So a lot of people are rightly, I think, incredibly worried about that. I'm incredibly worried about that. I'm a techno optimist. For years, I saw the internet as bringing the world together, and I'm not willing to let that go, Molly. So the purpose of the book is to try to make the case of how we can actually use this connected world to spread kindness instead of nastiness.
Why is generosity the ultimate idea worth spreading?
So that's a great question. And, to me, it connects so many dots in my own life, whether as an individual or as an organizational leader, or indeed running TED. To it, we've worked out things like the rule of law, like, the power of markets, if you like, that allow people working in their own interests to create amazing inventions and things that have spread across the planet. But none of this would work if we didn't have these weird instincts in us to be kind to each other, to trust each other. All of civilization is basically built on trust, and the amazing fact that people are willing to give attention, give things, give products, be kind to each other. Without that, everything else would ultimately collapse. All of history has depended on public-spirited reformers tweaking the parts of our systems that don't work. And they've done it out of a desire to make the world better for everyone, not just themselves. So I really think generosity is at the heart of everything that has made us who we are. And it's easy to forget it. And we're in danger, I think, of losing it. And if we do, it's going to usher in a very bleak future.
Because it's ultimately it's inherent in us, it's innate in us to want to spread generosity, is what I'm hearing you say.
I think it is. And it's in a way, it's a surprise that be so. We're animals. We're evolved to survive. And some people might think, well, it's not really in your interest to be generous to other people, just focus on yourself and your family. But no, we have evolved instincts to be kind to others, and that is actually how, as a whole, we've survived and thrived. So yes, it's wired deep within us, and what people discover when they are kind is that they get a unique kind of fulfillment from it, a sense of meaning, a sense of happiness, even, and that helps fuel this unexpected process. And it's not just that we're wired to be generous; we're actually wired to respond to generosity. And this is why generosity can become infectious, why you can get these ripple effects where someone's kind to someone else and they go, "Whoa, you did that? I now want to pass that on." And so people respond to the giver. They also respond to others. And this is how life becomes beautiful, and how we start looking around at each other and we see the beautiful things in each other instead of the ugliness.
Yes. Was there an aha moment in your own life that inspired you to write this book?
Hmm. Well, I've carried, I guess, my mother and father's voice with me my whole life. They're extraordinarily generous people, and I've always felt guilty about it and not really
Mm.
known what to do with it, because what's scary about generosity, it can feel like this sort of, if I go in that direction, I'm going to be subject to this endless, limitless sense of obligation.
Mm.
I don't think that's so. I think the way to think about generosity is as this wonderful experience that can unlock your better self and actually make your life happier. So for me, the big aha moment came when I found myself, running this strange organization, TED. Back 20 years ago, it was an annual conference that I'd taken over, but it was an inspiring conference. It was technology, entertainment, design, and people came out of it inspired. And I was trying to figure out how could we let that inspiration out into the world at large? I'd taken over TED through a nonprofit, and so there was an obligation to try and do this for the public good. And we couldn't figure out how to do it until this technology of online video came along. And as an experiment, we started putting out a few talks out onto the internet in that early sort of days when it was just juddery video and whatever. To our amazement, they went viral. And we had this dilemma. What do we do now? Because it felt like we had to give away all of our content. But that would imperil people paying for the conference, maybe. So we didn't know what to do. We went ahead and did it. I was surrounded by a group of very brave people. And it turned out to be the best thing we could ever have done. Far from taking away demand for the conference, it actually increased it because the word about TED spread around the world. Lots of people started listening to TED Talks, started sharing them, started translating them into other languages. And I was suddenly going, whoa, what's happening here? We gave away something that felt risky, and it's been the best thing we could ever do. What else could we do? So we did the same thing with our brand. We started allowing other people to do TED events. They called them TEDx events with that label on. It actually led to 3,000 annual events happening, and 25,000 videos a year we were getting back out of it. A lot of the best speakers that people have heard came from these TEDx events. So, Molly, I started thinking that I had it, that the rules had changed, that in this connected age, the rules had changed. What we should hold on to and what we should give away, we should rethink that. And actually, there's a kind of new rule for this age, which is be brave, give away the thing that you can, that feels like the most radical thing you give away, and be absolutely amazed at what comes back. And I don't think that's just true for TED. I think it's true for any other organization. I think it's true for individuals as well. And it can lead to very, very exciting things happen. And I've just seen stories about that again and again, of how people who've given away things have sparked these beautiful ripple effects.
Absolutely. And as someone who's written books and speaks, and I've been blessed to take the TEDx stage a couple times, Chris, and for that I'm grateful. And to your point, giving away content, giving away ideas, thoughts, inspiration, it always comes back. But that's not what it's about. But the story from 2019 and the $2 million, I just love that story. And it's powerful, and it's a powerful example of what you're speaking to right now. Can you share that?
Right. So you're talking about the strange mystery experiment, we called it, that happened a few years ago, when a couple in the TED community, they'd made some money through an investment game. They wanted to give back, but they wanted to do so in a different way. So we worked with them and came up with this idea for this crazy mystery experiment where 200 people on the internet would get $10,000, no strings attached. So people signed up for this experiment not knowing what they were signing up for. And they got this email from us that kind of sounded like the ultimate spam email. Congratulations, we'd like to wire $10,000 into your PayPal account, no strings attached, okay? And once we persuaded them that it wasn't spam, people took the money and something amazing happened. Like traditional economics theory would predict that they would spend most of this money on themselves. It's what rational agents do. It's not what happened. They spent two-thirds of the money on average generously. So some to family, to friends, to strangers, to causes, but $6,000 to $7,000 of that $10,000 was given away essentially, and that is the biggest sort of social experiment that's been done with generosity in this degree, and it confirms there have been similar results before with much smaller amounts, but it's kind of amazing that it stands up at this level and across many countries and different income levels. So people, there's just no question that people are wired to be generous. And what was beautiful was that I got a chance to reach, after the experiment was over, I reached out to some of the people who'd participated, and it was amazing what they said to me. They said that by getting this money, they felt seen, and they wanted to make other people feel seen the way that they felt seen. They just felt this urge to pass on what they had, and they ended up being sort of joyful doing so. So all this was just it was a beautiful surprise, and it led to scientific papers being published that have advanced the science of this, and they really help make this case that generosity is inside each of us. The desire to respond to generosity is inside each of us.
Yeah. Well, I know we're both friends with Adam Grant, and talk about a guy who is, I mean, he lives this for sure, and shows up in the world that way for sure. Even though he's a Michigan fan, Chris, I apologize. I still love him. But tell me this: what are some ways that when you wrote this book and you dug into this more deeply, how did it make you rethink generosity?
Well, first of all, I'd originally been thinking about it mostly in terms of just sort of internet stuff and then giving away money. One key realization as I dug in more is just how many ways there are to be generous. And many of the most inspiring generous acts aren't about giving away money. They're sort of gifts of time or creativity or talent or, one thing you mentioned, Adam Grant, one form of generosity he's passionate about is the giving away of connections, your personal networks. If you invite someone into your network, that's a huge gift that you are giving them. Hospitality, and I think artists can give away enchantment to people, especially in this connected age, in a way that is magnificent. So that was very exciting to me to see how many examples of that there are that have really spread online. And there's actually another particular form of generosity I think is really important in our divisive age, which is having the courage to be a bridge, someone who bridges, someone who reaches out and says, I won't be forced into a tribe. I'm going to listen with respect to the other side and take them seriously. So that was one piece of it. And a second piece was just that I needed to raise my own game in terms of, financial giving. And I argue in the book that there's a case that people who can afford to do so, people who are basically have got to the point where they're living comfortably, that there's huge power in making a pledge inspired really by some of the religious pledges of the past. In Christianity and Judaism, there's this concept of tithing where people are encouraged to give 10% of their income. In Islam, there's a concept called zakat, which is giving away annually 2.5% of your net worth. And in the book, I argue that, look, even if we're not religious, we want our moral standards to be at least as high as those of the traditional religions. How about we pledge to give away the higher of those two, the higher of 10% of your income or 2.5% of your net worth? And I've applied that to myself and I've signed up for that pledge. And what it does is that it forces you to think more strategically about your financial giving. Instead of just, most of us give on impulse. You said there's some disaster happens in the world, or you read some thing online that you're moved by, and you sort of quickly spend money that way. But There is money can have an impact, or it can have 100 times that impact, depending on how thoughtfully we
Mm-hmm.
spend it. There's huge opportunities for leverage of what we spend. And so I think that one of the great things that a pledge does, at whatever level you pledge, you don't have to pledge at that higher level, you can pledge at a lower level. But just by doing that and saying, I'm going to give away this amount of money every year, it
Mm-hmm.
forces you to think about it. And I think therefore probably spend the money more wisely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely another piece that had impact on me.
Talk to me about the pledge, that word, right? Because it's a different way to think about it, go about it, and with greater impact. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yes, so I mean, in the book, there's a particular site that I recommend that people go to, which allows you just to publicly make a pledge.
Mm-hmm.
It's called givingwhatwecan.org, and but whether you make it there or elsewhere, any amount that you pledge shifts you then into this sort of more strategic way of spending your money. And I
Mm-hmm.
I think that the key questions to ask then, other than the obvious ones of what do you really care about, is how do you how do you spend the money most effectively? And for me, the process of looking for an organization is not just to go through some of the traditional filters, which is this an organization with low overhead and so
Mm-hmm.
forth? It's
Mm-hmm.
to ask more about effectiveness. Is how is your money being leveraged? So, for example, technology, the use of technology can leverage the power of money. I quote the example of Kickstarter, which
Sure.
buys um, manual powered irrigation pumps for farmers, which can for $70 can bring a farmer out of poverty. Pretty cool. Or there's leverage from the government. Some orgs do an amazing job of identifying a weakness in how government money is being spent and leveraging that so that it can be spent wisely. For example, Code for America, who we've supported, has allowed really complex government forms that no one could actually get through be simplified massively and thereby unlock literally billions of dollars in potential benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's leverage from education, the sharing of knowledge, or from design, or from the internet itself, and so forth. So I think that's a really great question to ask is how is my money being leveraged?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do we? I mean, we live in a world, as you've talked about. There's a lot coming at everybody. It's just it's divisive. It is a scary time, isn't it, Chris? And there's a lot of people that are their level of demand on their lives is exceeding their capacity, and they're tired, they're exhausted, and so I can imagine people sort of going, "Wow, this sounds incredible," but how do we shift the mindset, right? Like shift the mindset around this conversation, the impact that it has on us, but more importantly on others relative to generosity.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have so much respect for people who are um, struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no moral code that says people ought to do something that it is impossible for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I don't know if you're a single mother fighting every day with a job and a half to try and look after a kid and try and somehow, you know, survive. All power to you, and the last thing you should hear from me is that you should be thinking about spending money on this or that. Um, but and in fact, just the very parenting itself is a huge act of generosity. Honestly,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that so many people spend so much time in. There's just many ways to give. I think
Right. I love how you talk about that.
the
I mean, that's
the
the
one
trick for the single
right.
mom with two, is it's not necessarily about money. Talk about that, Chris. That's awesome.
I mean, I think the thing to say is that there is joy to be had
Mm-hmm.
from generosity, whatever form you choose for it. So, someone without any money to give who nonetheless decides to spend an hour or two volunteering in some cause where they feel they get meaning from it, or they're
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
doing it with a friend, or it's just for a cause where they particularly they know what the person at the other end of that is suffering, and so it's meaningful for them to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There could be a lot of joy from that, and good
Mm-hmm.
things can come of it. I I think hospitality can be a huge gift. Just the act of inviting someone round and making them feel welcome, and it's a sort of, lots of people, even
Mm-hmm.
people who are poor, love to do this in some form or other.
Mm-hmm.
As a boy, I had I have this vivid memory of being invited into this home in Afghanistan. I spent some time in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
People who had nothing, they made us tea with sugar, and we sat on the floor and we drank tea together.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a human connection there. It was certainly deeply meaningful for us. Whether they they went away at the end of that saying, I really resent giving away that tea to those horrible white people coming in. I don't know. I don't think they did. It felt real. It felt human. And I think
Mm-hmm.
so. It's finding the way in which you could be generous, but just the very act of paying attention to someone. Sometimes the biggest act of generosity is to let someone feel seen.
Mm-hmm.
I've got several stories in the book of people who, they're walking down the street and they notice, there's someone in need there. Most of us feel uncomfortable when we see that, and our instinct is to walk on. But
Mm-hmm.
just the very act of stopping and looking at someone and having a
Mm-hmm.
conversation, that is generosity right there. And it may or may not lead to something else. It might lead to you buying them a coffee. It might lead to you giving them a little bit of money, or it might lead to many other things. So experiences like that have led to people, to huge ripple effects in people's lives, both on the receiving end and the giving end. And yeah, it starts with just that generosity mindset of saying, I'm going to be kind. Yeah, I think when people go on the internet, trying to find that generosity mindset makes a huge difference in how you respond. You see something you don't like online, our instinct is just to go F off or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe if instead you go, I guess I'm curious about why you said that. I don't immediately agree with that. Could you explain more?
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand you. Just the respect of listening to someone and trying to understand them. If we
Sure.
had more of that online, it would change
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Yeah, no question. And that virality and the opportunity to do that with the internet, and you talk a lot about that as a powerful thing. If you're thinking about becoming more generous, if this is a shift you want to be intentional about making, and you talk about a pledge, you talk about that it's not just money. I love in the book you talk about to enable connection, to your point, looking at somebody in the eyes, hospitality, sharing knowledge, of course you're super familiar with. If you're thinking about this generosity and infectious generosity, do you have a guide of sorts that you would almost share that would help somebody make these kinds of decisions in various moments?
I mean, everyone is different and in a different situation. I think the one question that connects everyone on the planet, and really is, I think, the most important question someone can ask about their lives, is, am I a net giver or a net taker?
Mm,
And there are so many
yeah,
ways that
that's
we
so
can
good.
there are so many ways that we can take from the world, and there are so many ways that we can give from the world. And no matter what our circumstance is, people without resources actually take very little from the world, and there's not that much they actually need to do to be a net giver. Just looking out for a friend, maybe
Hmm.
all that it is, or looking out for your kid, or that's fine. But someone who does a lot of travel probably wants to look at how they could offset, their carbon footprint. Someone who is in a company where they don't really believe in the company's mission maybe could spend some time trying to organize a meeting with a few other employees and say, what could we do for our work to be a better contribution to the world as a whole? And in the age that we're in, most companies depend for their value on their employees. And if a group of employees says, come on, guys, we need to raise our game here and change some of how we're impacting on the world. For example, if, again, whether we're taking resources from the planet and not giving back, or exploiting in some way, how could we change that? Employees can be incredibly effective. And I think
Hmm.
how you spend most of your work time, that is actually a big part of the calculation, really, as to whether you're a net giver or not. So if you're if you can, and not everyone can, but if you can work for a company whose mission you believe in, that's incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go on through other things. Just in terms of hospitality, are you
Mm-hmm.
someone who only ever accepts other people's hospitality, or do you sometimes offer it? There's these questions you can ask as you go through different different parts of your life, and I think it's worth everyone doing that. Once a year, just sitting down
Yeah.
and thinking. Am I a net giver or a net taker? If everyone in the world was on average a net giver, uh, all of our problems are tackleable, all
Yes.
of them. You
Yes.
know, and I think that's what we should aspire to.
Mm-hmm. And there's psychological links to happiness when we're a net giver. And there's science behind that. Tell me about that.
So that is the delicious surprise.
Yeah,
Really,
yeah.
it's an absolutely proven part of human psychology that people who are generous get happiness from it, surprising amounts of happiness from it. And it's kind of amazing to me that it's not. I mean, there's sort of some traditional wisdom about this. We probably heard it at some point from parents or Sunday school or whatever, but it is profoundly true. And in our day-to-day lives, it's often invisible to us because there are these more stronger voices in it of I need that product, or I need that thing, or we're worried about loss aversion. Loss aversion is a powerful sort of psychological thing that gets in the way whenever we're afraid to give away. The people who give ultimately are the people who experience the deepest happiness, and that's why,
Yeah.
in a way, the call to generosity is it's really saying this is in our long-term interest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's yes, it helps other people, of course. Ultimately, it really deeply, profoundly helps us as well.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you talk about shifting generosity from invisible to viral. Why, Chris, why is that important? And how do we do that in a way that's authentic and that's humble in nature?
Hmm. So I guess here I'm really thinking about what spreads online and what doesn't. Um, so much of the time, if you just look at typical social media output, say, or the news, even on a given day, what you read and see is often pretty scary, ugly stuff. Um, and the problem that we face here is that basically dark things are compelling, light things, goodness is boring,
Mm.
traditionally. And so how do you get over that? Like being earnest, people
Right.
like it for a bit, but honestly, move on. So the challenge is, how can acts of kindness be compelling? How
Mm-hmm.
can they go viral? And the truth is that some people have mastered this, and and so much hangs on this. It feels like a daunting problem. It may not be as daunting as we think. There's actually lots of good things sort of bubbling under the surface. And the difference between not viral and viral can be actually really small. So I give the thought experiment that if 10 people hear a story and pass it on to 9 other people on average, that story fizzles out. If that story is just a little bit more compelling and they pass it on to 11 people and that pattern continues, it goes viral. And sooner or later, the whole world knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, or possibly all we have to do is just that sort of 20% increase in
Mm-hmm.
interest. And yeah, I think there's lots of ways to do it. And the key things that I speak about are unlocking emotion. I mean, emotion is what makes something go viral. Often it's the dark emotions of fear and anger, but any authentic human emotion
Mm-hmm.
can persuade someone to share something with other people. And there's this wonderful story from the early days of the pandemic, where this woman in Australia, Catherine Barrett, she was feeling really blue, and everyone had been locked in, and she noticed that a neighbor had put a box of tissues
Mm.
on a table in the common space in the building with a note on it, say, please take one, and obviously people were teary and whatever, and she was really moved by it. It's such a small gift. It's a box of tissues, but
Right.
she took a picture of it, posted it on Facebook, and said, let's share these stories too. This thing sparked a group. She called it the kindness pandemic. 500,000 people joined, and there
So
were
cool.
thousands and thousands of stories of people's just sharing simple acts of kindness, and it was moving. And you go onto that
Mm-hmm.
site and you read it, and you tear up, and you think,
Mm-hmm.
"Wow, generosity should play a bigger role in my life."
Mm-hmm.
So emotion is a big thing. Creativity is really important. I think people who can do stuff with insane levels of creativity will get more attention. The same act, but just done with
Yeah.
panache.
Right.
And then courage is stories of courage. People are willing to be bold and brave.
Mm-hmm.
Those stories spread as well, and the good news is that there are lots of examples online now of people who are telling stories in a way that does spread. So there's Mr. Beast, who's one of YouTube's biggest influencers, whose videos are now like 100 million people plus are viewing them, and these are stories about just the joyfulness and amazingness of life. They're probably targeted at a younger generation than I am, and not everyone likes his style. But he's persuading a whole generation of
Mm-hmm.
kids that
Mm-hmm.
generosity can be really cool. Many of his
Mm-hmm.
videos are about uh, creative ways of being generous, and they're a delight. And there's lots of other examples on there, which we don't necessarily always see, but where if you pay attention to them,
Yeah.
you can start feeling very, very differently about your fellow humans. You can feel actually we're surrounded by people who are doing really great stuff, really cool stuff, really beautiful
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about virality, and we talk about, you've said, right, fixing the internet should be one of our biggest priorities, one of humanity's top priorities. So where do we start? This is a big thing that we're talking about
Yeah,
here. Where do we start?
It is. I mean, it's so important because if you don't fix this, all of the other problems we face, it's going to be near impossible to do them, because when you've got a world divided into tribes, we are killing our single biggest superpower, our ability to cooperate with each other. So we do have to solve this. I think part of the solution comes from what the social media platforms themselves can do, and some of it is what we can do as users of the internet. I mean, to my mind, what's happened here is not a big conspiracy. I don't think these companies said, let's go and be evil. We can make a lot of money that way. I think what happened was that we designed these platforms forgetting that humans are complicated, that we have these instinctive selves, what I call our lizard brains, and our reflective selves. Too much of social media has been fine-tuned to exploit our lizard brains.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was intentional, but it's that lizard brain addictiveness that keeps us doom scrolling for hour after hour,
Mm-hmm.
and potentially driving us into some of these uglier places. So for me, the way to think of the agenda here is, how do we give power back to our reflective selves?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's things that the social media companies can and must do. They are starting to do it. It includes things like encouraging breaks. It includes things like just tapping into people's curiosity and encouraging
Mm-hmm.
people to ask reflective questions of, is this time well spent?
Mm-hmm.
Am I happy to be doing this? It includes trying to move people to voice conversations. Sometimes people are much, much, much more human when they're speaking with each other
Sure.
than when they're shooting short little arrows of poisonous
Right.
text at each other. But then we ourselves can do this by adopting some of the same thinking that we do when we're thinking about diet or we're thinking about exercise. We are constantly in this battle between our instinctive selves and our reflective selves, and a lot of life is about trying to outwit that
Mm-hmm.
inner lizard or whatever. And the same applies online. Go online, be thoughtful about who you follow online. You can with all of these platforms, you can have a massively different experience if you mute some of the poison and
Mm-hmm.
double down on some of the excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, so I see people spending a lot of time online doing actually beautiful things. They're inspired by, here is a gorgeous, piece
Flower or
from
something. Yeah.
flowers, or yeah, beauty, or animals doing something great, or like people. There's lots of inspiration that can be
Sure.
had if we take care. And I think managing the amount of time we spend doom scrolling, and then just taking that conscious effort to amplify the good things.
Yeah,
That is
sure.
the single biggest thing to do, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is
Mm-hmm.
that there are people out there who are trying to do the right thing, and it's a slightly harder battle for them for
Mm-hmm.
the reasons that we've spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
need, if more of us can say, no, 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 follow this person and
Yeah.
spend our time here,
Yeah.
it's gonna turn the tide.
Yeah.
And I think the good thing is that there are so many people ready for the tide to be turned.
Yes,
I
no
think
question.
we are sick of
Sure.
the internet the way it has been, and there's lots and lots and there's millions and millions of us who want something different and better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to win this battle.
Well, and you're helping to spearhead this, Chris, which is awesome. And you know, I think what comes up for me as I think about the amount of time we spend on our computers, on our phones, on is asking ourselves, Chris, at some level, am I right now being a net giver or a net taker? Right? Am I pouring in with generosity? And to your point, I mean, that can be simply liking or commenting on something that somebody posts that's just good,
Mm,
kind, thoughtful, generous content. And
exactly.
choosing to hit eject potentially from the conversation or the moment or the, because there's a human being on the other side of these things that sometimes after we hit send we're like, oh yeah, I got him, and we can't, right? I mean, there's a human being on the other side of these things that we have to pull back, to your point, and have real conversations with love.
I I think that's right. I think that's right.
It's
And I think
important.
it's already happening, and it it doesn't have to happen that much more before suddenly the whole internet's going to feel
Yeah,
like a very
yeah,
different place.
that's cool. So as leaders, and as we think about the corporate world and we think about real implementation, really structuring conversations around this to begin as leaders to help make that shift. And if you're not a leader, to be a part of making that shift in your organization, where would you tell somebody to start?
I mean, look, I think there's huge power in just organizing a brainstorm in any
Okay.
organization
Okay.
that asks this question: what is the most radical thing we could give away?
Cool.
And
Wow.
just play with that question. Just play
Mm,
with that question. A lot of organizations have incredible assets or resources that actually probably could be shared with the world and um, would give a lot of value to people. And what they might well discover is that by giving them away, it will actually boost their own reputation. More
mhm.
people know about them, and they think about them. Wow, I can't believe this org gave that away. That is great. It will improve the quality of the people who apply for jobs there. And lots and lots of good, I think, can come from that. But look, it's different in every circumstance. But that's where I'd start. I think it's a
Yeah.
really, really exciting brainstorm to have. What is the most radical thing we could give away?
Super cool. That is awesome advice. And you talk about the annual generosity checkup. And so can you get me inside of that a little bit? And what are the questions we should ask ourselves inside of our annual generosity checkup?
Yeah, we briefly touched on this earlier because
Yes.
it goes, the question you're really trying to get to is this question of, am I a net giver or a net taker? And is there
Mm-hmm.
more I could do on that? And I think it starts with you're asking about your job, your main, sorry. I think it starts by asking about your job, how you're spending most of your time, and whether uh, you're working for the right kind of company.
Yeah.
And if you're not, whether either, I think your choices are either to try and do something about that at the company, or possibly to look for a job move if you can. That would be one piece. There's questions about hospitality. There's questions about are you spending any time volunteering? You know, people who aren't in a position where they can say make that financial pledge. Um, can they make some kind of other time pledge? Could they commit an hour or two a week
Mm-hmm.
to
Sure.
volunteering? Um, and then ultimately, it's about mindset. It's about, am I spending enough
Mm-hmm.
of my time in a generosity mindset? Because everything else will flow from that.
Yeah. Yeah. This is fantastic. I love the book. Thank you. We were able to get a pre-copy, which was pretty awesome. What's next for TED, Chris?
Oh goodness. Well, um, I, I really think TED is going to double down hard on just the importance of ideas. You know, we're in a
Mhm.
world where it's incredibly hard to compete with the blizzard of content that's out there. Um, TikTok and Instagram and X and so forth, that's just massively addictive as sort of short, mental hits. And it's actually quite hard for traditional TED Talks to compete against that content in the way
Mhm.
that they
Mhm.
did when TED Talks first came out and people were surprised by them. Um, but I think there's two things that we're planning to do. One is, yes, we are producing some of our talks in shorter form, that where you get the essence of the idea, but just expressed in a way that will fit into someone's doom scrolling lifestyle. Um, but more importantly than that is we are determined to persuade the world that ideas change everything. Um, that's actually our new tagline. For years, our tagline has been ideas we're spreading.
Mhm.
We want to be more assertive, actually, that ideas matter. You know, like
Mhm.
ideas that the right idea slipped into someone's mind can change their life for years to come. I mean, just
Mhm.
this idea right now, you know, look out listening to this podcast, Molly, you may just have infected some of your listeners with something that they won't be able to let go of, and it will
Mhm.
change what they do for a long time to come. This is what ideas do. So we're doubling down on that, and to basically to say, look, you can doom scroll, but if you spend time actually with ideas that matter,
Mhm.
that could have a much bigger payoff.
Yeah.
And so I'm incredibly excited about, like, I've never, at a time when artificial intelligence is
Mhm.
going to change the history more quickly and more dramatically than we know, I've
Mhm.
never been more excited about the role that tech can play, because we've always been about technology, but also about bringing in these other voices, you know,
Mhm.
the storytellers and the poets and the philosophers and
Sure.
the just the champions of humanity.
Mhm.
We need all those voices if we're to navigate this moment well, and to use the power of AI in a way that is net positive for humanity. In a way, you know, one reason why I feel urgency about this whole idea is that AI, we're teaching AIs what to be by looking at the internet and looking at us. And right now, that
Yeah.
picture isn't necessarily very
That's
beautiful.
so true.
It's so important that we
Wow.
teach AIs to be built on our best selves,
Mhm.
and if we do that, they can help us become even better selves.
Mm.
There's a sort of virtuous cycle that can happen there, and so I've never felt more passionately that TED has a role to play here, that these
Mhm.
ideas, getting them out there, getting them articulated in a crisp and important way, it's never mattered more. And
Mhm.
so we're all in on doing that.
I love it. Well, it's interesting the way you just spoke about that relative to the internet and AI. There's a sense of urgency here.
Yes,
There's a sense of
100%,
urgency. Yes.
100%,
Chris, we end with
100%.
rapid fire, so I'm going to hit you with some quick ones. You ready?
Uh-oh,
You
uh-oh.
think on your feet. You got
I
this
don't
down,
know. I'm
man.
pretty indecisive. Let's try it.
What's the best book that you've read in the last year?
Well, I'm going to be really annoying and mention my better half's book. It's,
Mm,
it's called
she is a rock.
Manifesto.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm married to this incredible woman, Jacqueline
Yes.
Novogratz, who is fighting poverty at a sort of global level. She has an incredible book. It's called Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. It's really for anyone who would like to change the world in some way, and just wants to know how. And she has so much
Hmm.
wonderful advice in that book.
A rapid fire time out here. I have to tell you, I have been a fan of your wife for years and years and years. Before she was your wife, what an incredible woman. Wow.
Yeah,
Well
I'm
done.
lucky. I'm so lucky.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. All right, here we go. The best advice you've ever received and from who?
In my very first job, I worked for a news editor who was vicious to me on occasion. Like really, he would mock me, which was terrible, and that's not my advice. But he would
Mm-hmm.
also do something else. When he was enthusiastic about something that I had done, he would shout, he would like ding a ding and tell the whole newsroom, you know, great scoop has come in from Chris Anderson,
Uh-huh.
and it would feel so good. It was so energizing and motivating, and so the power of passionate enthusiasm,
Mm.
like as an entrepreneur,
Sure.
if you want to bring people with you and really
Yep.
excite them, find the moments to catch them out doing something amazing and absolutely celebrate them
Mm.
for that.
Yeah.
I don't always do that as well as I should, but I absolutely believe in it.
Yes. Yes. So, what TED Talk do you find yourself recommending most often?
Yeah, so it really depends who I'm talking to. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
nerdy, and I like talks by this physicist David Deutsch, who celebrates the power of knowledge. But they're very quirky and probably not for everyone. I don't know. Tim Urban's talk on procrastination is
Mm.
hilarious and incredibly useful. All of us struggle with procrastination and not spending our time the way we quite want to. He explains it in an incredibly compelling way and has some powerful advice on what to do
Oh,
about
that's
that.
cool. I haven't watched that. I will. Person you'd most like to see on the TED stage in the future?
Oh, um, well, I'm going to say Trevor Noah. I've just been listening to his hilarious autobiography. He's so funny. He's so wise. Um, I, we've, you know, he should be on the stage. Some people who can offer great advice through the guise of just humor. You know, that's
Yes.
just such a damn
Yes.
gift. That is so great.
Yes, it sure is. In the last year, what's a new habit or a new ritual, Chris, that's most improved your life?
Daily gratitude.
Mm.
Just finding one thing each morning to be grateful to the universe for,
Mm-hmm.
and it's you know there's the obvious things like your family and loved ones and so forth and friends, and then there's other things that I feel just deeply grateful for, like god damn it, the internet, you
Mm.
know, for all its faults. It's I mean, can you imagine the pandemic without the internet and you know the way that it kept us connected? I just think this is such a great time to be alive, and despite all the
Mm-hmm.
scary stuff out there, I find so much to be grateful for, and it's from that gratitude, by the way, that that generosity flows.
I
Like
bet.
if
Yep.
if
No
you feel
question.
grateful, you can't but help be generous.
Sure. Sure. There's a tight connection, no question. So, Chris, the show's called Game Changers. So, one last question. Who or what is a game changer? A game changer who inspires you and why?
Long pause so as to
My guys can
get
pull
the
this
best.
in. Yeah.
um, Intellectually, the person who changed me most was Steven Pinker, way
Mm-hmm.
like 25 years ago with his writing on evolutionary psychology. I'd never thought of humans as evolved
Mm-hmm.
animals,
Mm-hmm.
and when you think of it that way, so many riddles about us fall into place. The
Mm-hmm.
weird things that we do, the fact that some of our desires aren't well matched for the modern era. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
evolved, for example, obviously in an era where there was a shortage of sugar and fat, and now there isn't.
Right.
And so the things that we crave aren't necessarily what we should be craving. So I found that incredibly great.
Mm.
Um, um, but in terms of it, it in terms of sort of emotional motivation, probably the person who had the most impact on me was actually Amy Mullins. I think I've told her this, but she was so she's an athlete who lost her legs
Mm-hmm.
as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw her in my first TED. She was sitting on stage and just talking in a very relaxed way. She actually unscrewed her legs and
Mm-hmm.
put them back in, and she spoke about empowerment and possibility and how amazing it is we're in an age where someone like her can still be an athlete and can win races.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just that sense of personal, just o- owning a future where and redefining a future where you could think of yourself as a victim or as someone who'd really suffered, and
Sure.
instead seeing yourself as
Hmm.
someone who has the whole world open to them. I was sitting in the back row of TED there, my first TED, you know, crying, like the tears
Wow.
were rolling down. I did not expect to come to this conference and cry. She made me
Hmm.
cry, and it's actually that helped show me why this event really mattered. And I think there's
Hmm.
probably a direct causal line between that experience and decision to actually buy TED. And so it's
Hmm.
quite possible that if you've ever seen a TED talk, somewhere in the causal chain of that talk is Amy Mullins.
Mm. Wow. And to think about what's happened, Chris, since you were sitting in the back of that room listening to Amy to where you are now. And this book is fantastic. Thank you for helping us all be better.
Well, thank you, Molly, and thank you for this podcast and for some great questions.